I'm going to start before any adventures for the magazine, before I was out in Antarctica, before any of this happened. I'm going to start by telling you how cool I was as a kid. Because honestly, I was pretty cool. I was the first hipster ever, sideways trucker hat. I was kicking Oshkosh Bagosh, popped collar, the whole deal. But really, the point of this picture is to show you that from a very young age, I was in campgrounds, and my brother and I were in campgrounds, and we were always raised to be in campgrounds. As my parents would have it, they wanted us to go out from the tiniest age and go out and experience the world and push our boundaries and try to understand what the world was around us. And that was very important in my family. So they started us skiing when we were 2, climbing when we were 5. And the whole point was to sort of define our own borders. This is me in the Wind River Range, close to where I live now in Bozeman, Montana, at about, I guess I'm 11, 12 years old. You know, this is when questioning boundaries started to take a different turn. I was a smart kid. I went to high school 2 years early, and, you know, exploring boundaries took on a completely different texture at that point. And what I mean by that is I started exploring social boundaries rather than physical ones. And when you're 12 years old in high school and you're hanging out with 18-year-old kids, you don't have that 6 years of experience to prepare you for that. And so honestly, by the time I was 14 years old, I was completely dropped out of high school. My parents sent me to rehab. I ran away 3 times. And on the 3rd time, as they say, the 3rd time is the charm, my parents gave up. And it's not that they wanted to give up or I blame them for that, but they said, quite honestly, Cory, we're scared of you. We don't know what to do. And if you can't abide by our rules, then you can't live at home. So I was 14 and homeless. I look back on the privilege of education, and I shudder to think what I was thinking, but that was the decision I made. But that time period led me to observe the world from a very curious place. When I'm on the streets, which was rare because oftentimes my friends helped me and I wasn't actually sleeping on the streets too much, but sometimes I was. And when I would see people picking out of garbage cans, it took on a different tone to me. When I myself would have to look for food, it took on a different tone. And what I mean by that is I started to see this as closer to our natural state. That is a forager foraging. And everybody in this room is actually much further removed than our evolved trajectory than we like to think. That forager is far closer to the way we evolved. And it was that story, that time, seeing people struggle that actually got me excited about telling bigger stories. And thank God for my parents, because they did start me climbing so young that it had a gravitational, or I guess an anti-gravitational pull back to it. Climbing was a thing that got me out of this, because I came back, I was driven to do something, and oddly enough, visually and just in the very nature of it, it's allegorical to human struggle. It's perfect for telling the story of what humans are capable of and how much we can overcome. And not only that, visually, it's just stunning. And you can grab people and you can capture their imagination. So my early career was all about this. I would go out and I would take pictures with really crappy cameras, and I would try to sell them to companies. And with that money, I would go on other trips. And I'd save it, and I'd save more, and I'd go on bigger trips, and I'd sell to different companies. And so that's how my whole early career worked. And for a while, it was very sustaining, and I loved it because, you know, I could say I was a professional photographer, and people would really respect me, and I was really proud of myself. You know, I was kind of proving people wrong at this point. I was proving everybody that said I wasn't going to amount to anything wrong. I was saying, no, I'm going to amount to something. And I think a lot of my early career was dedicated to that. A lot of it was dedicated to making single images. And I call these single stories, right? So a single story is an image that you provide to a company that inspires, some sort of inspiration that really inspires people to buy raincoats. So I am a glorified raincoat salesman, which is fine, or at least it was okay with me early on. But I started to see this divergence between these single image stories that I was hired to tell and the larger narrative that I was really engaged in, the things that I really wanted to talk about, which was not the heroic moment. It was the absolute opposite. It was the anti-hero moment. It was the 1,000-yard stare. It was my version of conflict photography in the outdoor space. I wanted to talk about what it's like to hurt, what it feels like. And naturally, as you travel, for those of us who have had the great privilege of traveling, the more you travel, the more engaged you become. You become engaged with culture, and you start to grow a certain sense of compassion, or at least I did. This is a picture that I took a very, very long time ago. But I remember it distinctly because all of a sudden, after looking at this image back in Huaraz, coming out of the hills in Peru, I remember looking at this and thinking, oh, climbing's kind of dumb. And it's true because it's a very self-indulgent act. And I realized I needed climbing, A, because it sustained me, and B, because it took me to these places. But the most important thing was a thing that I had missed to that point. I was so engaged in my own struggle and telling that story that I was missing everybody around me. So culture became a very focal point in my early development. But again, I wasn't a photographer of any note at this point. Nobody was going to hire me to go tell a cultural story. I was always going to be hired to go tell the story of mountains, and that's okay. This is a picture of Mount Everest on the left. The little one in the middle is Lhotse. In 2010, Conrad Anker, one of our other explorers, asked if I would go here and install time-lapse cameras on the Khumbu Glacier to monitor deflation, and it was for Jim Balog's movie Chasing Ice, because we wanted to look at the impacts of climate change on the glaciers in the Khumbu region. Coincidentally, Conrad could kind of sense this. I mean, Conrad's been a climber for a long time, and he could just see me looking up, kind of like, the time-lapse cameras are cool, but that's really cool. Like, I want to go there. And so we actually finagled. We called down to Kathmandu, and I got a permit to climb Lhotse. There was no way I was going to get a permit to climb Everest at this point. It was too late. But they got me a permit to climb Lhotse. And it was unlikely that I was going to do it. There was no way, because most people take about 8 weeks, and they go up and down to get acclimatized. I had been there for 3 weeks. I hadn't been higher than base camp, and I had 6 days till the summit window. So people were like, well, good luck, have fun, go up, don't die. That's a common theme in my life. Have fun, don't die. But I ended up climbing it. I ended up climbing it in 6 days. So a total of, 3.5 weeks from my house to the top of the 4th highest mountain in the world. And that got noticed. It got noticed by a guy named Simone Moro. Now, Simone Moro is an Italian climber. He's known for hard first winter ascents. And he called me after this climb, and he said, in this awesome voice, I'm going to do it again. You guys ready? He talked like this. I'm not kidding. He calls like this. He said, Cory, do you want to go to Gasherbrum too? Wintertime, meet Dennis. And I said, I don't understand what you're saying, but I would love to go with you because you're my hero. Where are we going? Gasherbrum too. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. Where's that? And he goes, it's in Pakistan. And for those of you who don't know, there's 14 8,000-meter peaks in the world. So 14 peaks that are above roughly 26,000 feet. And 9 of them are in Tibet and Nepal, and 5 of them are in Pakistan. And the 9 in Tibet and Nepal have all been climbed, or had at this point all been climbed in winter. But none of the Pakistani 8,000-meter peaks had ever been climbed in winter because they're about 600 miles north. The weather's much more severe. And people, a lot of people at this point, I think 16 expeditions over 26 years had tried and failed. But here's the thing, I leapt before thinking. I didn't even know any of that. Likewise, I didn't know that if I did this, I would be the first American to climb any 8,000-meter peak in winter. But of course, I said yes, and all of a sudden I was here on the literal physical border of India and Pakistan. So that's something to pay attention to. I remember taking this photo mostly because I saw it happening. I knew the sun was going to crest, and I knew, we're on our summit push here, and so I ran ahead in crampons. That's really hard. It doesn't look cool. You're like, and I ran, and because I ran, I was just so out of breath that I immediately vomited. And then I get my camera out, I take my mittens off, I think it's actually minus 50, and I pull it up and I realize I can't take it, it's frozen, I can't turn it off shutter priority, so I can't change the shutter speed, I can't do anything, and it's at a 50th of a second, which for those of you who don't know, that's very slow, especially when you're just vomited and you're trying to do that. And I took this picture. And that was that. I knew that moment was special because I also knew in that moment that we were very likely going to summit. But the summit there was just the beginning. Like I said, I didn't know I'd be the first American. I didn't know any of that. And to be fair, had I known, I don't think it would have been good for me. I was climbing out of pure joy, and I loved it. As we got to the summit, a storm hit, and on the way down, we were hit by a massive avalanche. 6 days out onto our summit bid, one day, the last day to base camp, we were hit by an avalanche. And I sent this picture to my mom when we got back, and I said, "Mom, we made it, we're back safe." And she goes, "Ooh, it's a lovely portrait. Is that Dennis?" And I said, "That's me, Mom." She goes, "Ooh. Ooh, that's gross." And I'm like, yeah, because I look like I'm 90, it is gross. My face is all swollen. Did you guys know that more people have died this year from taking selfies than shark attacks and lightning combined? Yeah, it's bad news. Don't do it. But do keep taking selfies because apparently you can get them on the cover of National Geographic. That's a thing. But honestly, to get serious for a second, that moment, as much as the avalanche was a defining moment in my career, and this image became something, it became much more than I had ever anticipated. It represents something much deeper. And I look at it now. I look at the gesture. I look at the facial expression. And what I see is somebody who's struggling to deal with a traumatic event. A very, very traumatic event. What happens to the brain is when it thinks it's going to die, it quite literally prepares for death. And so when people say, my life flashed before my eyes, that's a very real thing. It's not the way you think of it. It's not like all these beautiful visions and things. Sometimes you're like, Cheerios, parking tickets, it's all of it compiled. And, but I see this now, and what I see is a person who is alive, realizing they're alive after their brain has prepared for death. And what that manifests as, in psychological terms, is PTSD. That's where it goes from there. The experience is locked in your brain. Your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, and you are continually experiencing that moment from that point on. So it's spinning out. And essentially, that's just a corrosive method for your brain. And what you do is you try to find anything to calm that spinning down. It's where all addiction stems from. So I didn't know it at the time, but G2 had given me the first American to do something in 8,000 meter peak in winter and PTSD. It's the gift that keeps on giving, but we'll get into that. I went home and I got married. I got married to a wonderful woman. We had a wonderful group of friends. We had incredibly supportive families. We lived an alternate lifestyle that, you know, some parents would be a little alarmed by, like, okay, you're going to go climb mountains and you're going to go climb rocks. And we had very supportive family. But the problem was that even right after my marriage, I started to feel disassociated, and I started to feel a withdrawal, and I started to feel confusion and darkness, and I didn't know what it was. I felt like there was a weight pushing down on me, like a literal weight. I'd wake up in the morning, and my brain was just going, and it was like this very loud silence. And it reminded me of a quote that I read, a quote from a book. It says, "They carried all that they could bear, and then some, including a silent awe for the terrible power of the things that they carried." That's by Tim O'Brien from the book, The Things They Carried. G2 didn't just leave me with PTSD, it gave me something else. It gave me an opportunity to provide a storytelling example to National Geographic. There was a Pakistani military camp at base camp, and because we were there in the winter, they were very welcoming. They opened up their doors to us. They were sort of intrigued by us. Who are these three crazy guys climbing in winter? Because in the summertime, you can't go here. It's just off limits because there's too many people up on the glacier. And you know, these guys are 18 to 24 years old. I was so alarmed by what I had seen in Western media and what was actually happening there. So I took on the task of trying to communicate their story in very, very brief terms, because I wanted to come back and have something to show to Sadie Courier, who had asked, she's my photo editor here, who had asked, hey, can you show me some storytelling examples? It was a very unique opportunity, extremely unique. And to look back at these and see what I was trying to do, I can understand it. And I think, you know, some of them are okay. But oddly enough, I just want to tell how we got here. These guys would come over to our camp and they'd kind of peek in, and, you know, it's like looking like, you know, they were 6-year-olds, and then they'd like kind of nervously walk in, and we'd have tea with them. And then finally, the reason it all worked out, the reason we became friends, is because they asked, hey, Cory, I know you guys have internet. Could I check my Facebook? So now I have like a ton of friends named Farouk, Mohammed, and I'm on the TSA watch list, which is awesome. I can't get on a plane to save my life. But, you know, it was a real lesson in creating intimacy and learning through nonverbal communication and trying to take pictures that told deeper, more meaningful stories, and really using that which is different to show that which makes us all the same. I love this photograph. It's like not technically perfect. What self-respecting photographer leaves his shadow in the bottom? Like, it's like hardly in focus, but the guy has a purple tracksuit. Like, that is dope. That is awesome. And who dries their clothes in -40? Why would you do that? But the thing is, it's just like, I'm a guy out drying my clothes. Sure, I'm in the Pakistani military on the highest battlefield in the world, but guess what? It's relatable. And that's what brings us together. That's the power of photography. It brings us together. It brings us closer. This is hard living up here. This is very intimate space. And to be invited in and to be shown that level of friendship was a true gift. And it made me connect with these guys in a way, a very real way, where I started feeling much more for their struggle. And their struggle is one that is very, very real. Bertrand Russell has a wonderful quote. It says, "War does not determine who is right, only who is left." And, you know, I found this foot of a Pakistani soldier frozen in the ice on the glacier, and it occurred to me that this is somebody's son and probably somebody's brother and maybe somebody's uncle. these wars are ugly and they leave scars. And our actions as humans have consequences. They all do. But this led me to my first assignment for National Geographic. They said, yeah, you can take a couple pictures. We'll try you out. Might not go so well, but we'll give you a shot. It was to an area called Mustang. It's on the northern border of Nepal, just south of Tibet. And, it was pivotal for Tibetan freedom fighters at the end of the Cultural Revolution. But before that, for thousands of years before that, it was a space of absolute beauty and mystery. We were using climbing to access these caves, and what I love about that is, back to one of the previous photographs, it's the hook. Adventure is the hook to get people involved in science, and then we can talk about culture and human migration. So when you're telling stories, you want to bring these elements together. That's sort of what I found works best for me. And effective storytelling always brings you in. It brings you very, very close. It takes you into the caves. It gives you the smells and the textures. It shows you that dry, that sort of sand everywhere. But it's interesting when I look at these now, too, I feel like there's a parallel with what was happening in my life. I felt like I was standing at the opening of a cave, looking in, or not wanting to go in, but just sort of being sucked in. And not being able to see, and feeling completely this sense of vertigo. I didn't know what was happening. And much like Matt is doing here, I was picking up random pieces and trying to fit them together and figure them out, but nothing seemed to work. In this image, Matt is actually finding a piece of pecha. Pecha is ancient script. A lot of times it looked like this: pick it up, blow the dust off. It was tax records or things like that. Sometimes it would look like this. And that is an illuminated folio that predates Buddhism. This is Bun. So this is the animistic tradition of the Tibetan plateau before the spreading of Buddhism. It gives it a deeper understanding of how the culture there evolved. It's really about taking images that take tiny little pieces of the puzzle and then put them all together. That's what a visual narrative is. And some of them have to take bigger leaps than others. But it's construction from the ground up. And you have to open yourself up to seeing things in a very different way. After a very long time, we finally found what we were looking for, which was human remains. This is rescue archaeology. These caves are actually literally exfoliating off the side of the mountain. So we'd go in and we'd collect samples that we could. What we were really looking for here were teeth. Now, if you think of this in a way, basically, human remains are like finding the corner and the edge pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, right? Once you have that, you start to piece things together. The reason teeth are important is because there's in your tooth enamel, there's something called strontium. It's SR38 on the periodic table. And what that has in it is a geo thumbprint, essentially. It tells you where you were born. So if you can find somebody's remains and you get their strontium index, and they were born someplace different than where they died, and you do that with everybody in the burial crypt, well, all of a sudden, you're painting a very real picture about human migration and trade. And this is the story of our human family. This is why this matters. We're connecting the pieces. And what's so important about that, and I think it's more important now than ever. Now, this is ancient history, but ancient history matters because it's only through understanding our past, and I mean this so much, especially this week, only through understanding our past can we hope to navigate our future. So we have to pay attention to this stuff. When things, when we look back and we look at the events that happen, how can we predict the future? And hopefully, how can we alter it to go down a better road? Because, honestly, we all look up at the sky and we think, the world's so big and it's infinite. You know what? It's not. The sky might be infinite, but the world is very, very, very finite. It's extremely finite and it's extremely fragile.